Welcome to the Folktale Project. This is Dan Scholz. Today we have the end of The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. We've seen the traditional Disney style of the Sleeping Beauty story be told. And where we last left off, the Sleeping Beauty had been brought by her husband, who is now king, into his kingdom. And after he leaves for war, she's left in the charge of her mother-in-law, who just happens to be part ogre. And so it is that we're going to pick up again with the end of the Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. Some few days afterward, she went thither herself and said to her clerk of the kitchen, "I have a mind to eat little morning for my dinner tomorrow." "Ah, madam," cried the clerk of the kitchen. "I will have it so," replied the queen. And this she spoke in the tone of an ogress who had a strong desire to eat fresh meat. "And will eat her with a sauce." The poor man, knowing very well that he must not play tricks with ogresses, took his great knife and went into the little morning's chamber. She was then 4 years old, and came up to him jumping and laughing to take him about the neck and ask him for some sugar candy. Upon which he began to weep. The great knife fell out of his hand, and he went into the backyard and killed a little lamb, and dressed it with such good sauce that his mistress assured him that she had never eaten anything so good in her life. He had, at the same time, taken up little morning and carried her to his wife, to conceal her in the lodging he had at the bottom of the courtyard. About 8 days afterward, the wicked queen said to the clerk of the kitchen, "I will sup on little day." He answered not a word, being resolved to cheat her as he had done before. He went to find out little day, and saw him with a little foil in his hand, with which he was fencing with a great monkey, the child being then only 3 years of age. He took him up in his arms, and carried him to his wife, that she might conceal him in her chamber along with his sister, and in the room of little day cooked up a little kid, very tender, which the ogress found to be wonderfully good. This was hitherto all mighty well, but one evening this wicked queen said to her clerk of the kitchen, "I will eat the queen with the same sauce I had with her children." It was now that the poor clerk of the kitchen despaired of being able to deceive her. The young queen was turned of 20, not reckoning the 100 years she had been asleep, and how to find in the yard a beast so firm was that what puzzled him. He took then a resolution that he might save his own life to cut the queen's throat, and going up into her chamber with the intent to do it at once, he put himself into as great fury as he could possibly, and came into the young queen's room with his dagger in his hand. He would not, however, surprise her, but told her, with a great deal of respect, the orders he had received from the Queen Mother. Do it, said she, stretching out her neck. "Execute your orders, and then I shall go and see my children, my poor children, whom I so much and so tenderly loved." For she thought them dead ever since they had been taken away without her knowledge. "No, no, madam," cried the poor clerk of the kitchen, all in tears. "You shall not die, and yet you shall see your children again, but then you must go home with me to my lodgings, where I have concealed them, and I shall deceive the queen once more by giving her in your stead a young hind." Upon this, he forthwith conducted her to his chamber, where, leaving her to embrace her children and cry along with them, he went and dressed a young hind, which the queen had for her supper, and devoured it with the same appetite as if she had been the young queen. Exceedingly she was delighted with her cruelty, and she had invented a story to tell the king at his return how the mad wolves has eaten up the queen, his wife, and her 2 children. One evening, as she was, according to her custom, rambling about the courts and yards of the palace to see if she could smell any fresh meat, she heard in a ground room little Day crying, for his mamma was going to whip him because he had been naughty, and she heard at the same time little Morning begging pardon for her brother. The ogress presently knew the voice of the queen and her children, and, being quite mad that she had been thus deceived, she commanded next morning by break of day, with a most horrible voice which made everybody tremble, that they should bring into the middle of the great court a large tub, which she caused to be filled with toads, vipers, snakes, and all sorts of serpents, in order to have thrown into it the queen and her children, the clerk of the kitchen, his wife and maid, all whom she had given orders should be brought thither with their hands tied behind them. They were brought out accordingly, and the executioners were just going to throw them into the tub, when the king, who was not so soon expected, entered the court on horseback, for he came post, and asked with the utmost astonishment what was the meaning of that horrible spectacle. No one dared to tell him, when the ogress, all enraged to see what had happened, threw herself head foremost into the tub, and was instantly devoured by the ugly creatures she had ordered to be thrown into it for others. The king could not but be very sorry, for she was his mother, but he soon comforted himself with his beautiful wife and his pretty children. And that is the end of The Sleeping Beauty in the Wood. And as you can tell, it clearly does not end as the Disney version does, but it does end very happily. Very happily indeed. This is Dan Scholz of the Folktale Project. Don't forget that you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Overcast, anywhere you like to get your podcasts. You can follow us on Twitter at Folktale Project. You can find us on Auto Radio, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, Spotify, anywhere you like to listen. And you can always head over to folktaleproject.com. You'll find a new story waiting for you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. As always, thank you so much for listening.